All right, well, welcome everyone to the next installment of the live weather and climate office hours. This one, again, a short one today, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, focused on real time events. The snow, the low elevation snow in many parts of California that's ongoing and will continue for the next day or so. And then the extraordinarily heavy snowfall that's going to occur in some parts of the southern Sierra and the transverse ranges of southern California. Potentially a historically large snowstorm for parts of the mountain areas of southern California. In addition, the storm on Friday into Saturday has intensified a bit in projections for Southern California, and so could produce some other issues, even in places where the precipitation is falling solely as rain rather than snow, because the precipitation will be quite heavy and may be associated with some thunderstorms. So there could be some modest, at least, flood concerns as well, mainly in steep terrain, not so much river flooding, but more from a flash flood perspective. All right, so what's going on right now? I was just looking on Twitter and around the Weather West comments section, and there's pretty good confirmation at this point that the snow level is now all the way down to sea level, as had been expected along the north coast. So Del Norte County, thinking about Eureka, Arcata, and really all of the towns up there. All of them are reporting snow at least occasionally to sea level with accumulation. So that part of the forecast has definitely panned out. Snow is falling to very low elevations right now, all throughout California, but in the Bay Area and the North Bay in particular, talking about Lake County and Mendocino County, the snow level appears to be down to around 500 to 1,000 feet, so very low. 500 feet is extremely low, and there have been a few reports of some flakes down even below 500 feet already, which is not too surprising given the air mass. So the snow level, I think, in the Mendocino, Lake, Sonoma, Napa County areas is between about 500 and 1,000 feet at the moment, although in isolated showers it can be lower. Core of the Bay Area, lots of snow reports from the Santa Cruz Mountains where snow is starting to accumulate. It isn't too deep yet, but just wait until tomorrow, where there could be quite substantial accumulations in some places. Same with the East Bay Hills. A few flurries have been reported down to around 1,500 feet. Those might start making it down toward more like 1,000 feet or even 500 feet overnight, with some more substantial accumulations on Mount Hamilton, Mount Diablo, and even some of the higher hills in between. The Sierra foothills, snow again being reported down to 1,000 feet, locally lower. I think that'll fall even a little bit lower tonight in some places, so down to 500 feet locally. No significant snowfall yet in the northern Sacramento Valley, but all signs point towards that occurring tonight, with significant accumulation possible in places like Redding and even Red Bluff, as well as a few other spots along the foothill slopes of the central Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys down to about 400 or 500 feet elevation. So again, this is very low. Still do not believe there will be accumulating snowfall at sea level in the Bay Area or in the Central Valley near sea level like in Sacramento. But it is possible that just about any place in Northern California could see at least some flakes overnight tonight, mixed in with the precipitation that will get significantly heavier tonight as well. So right now we're sort of in an isolated to scattered shower regime, and these showers are producing accumulating snowfall above 500 or 1,000 feet in Northern California. Tonight, a more organized band of rainfall will develop, which could actually be locally heavy and maybe even have some embedded thunderstorms near the coast. The intensity of that precipitation, combined with slightly colder air aloft, even colder than right now, is going to drag the snow level down to about 500 feet across most of Northern California. So that's going to include some areas that very rarely see snowfall. It's even possible that locally the snow level ends up getting below 500 feet in Northern California. Of course, it already is along the north coast, but I'm talking about elsewhere, including the parts of the San Francisco Bay Area, the Central Valley, including both the Sacramento and the San Joaquin. I think that the snow level, accumulating snow, probably won't fall below about 500 or 600 feet, but there could be a few surprises, and I would not be that astonished to see reports of accumulating snowfall even below 500 feet at least on an isolated basis. And the main reason for that is the air aloft tonight is going to be so cold, and that's unusual because there's going to be a pretty organized band of precipitation. So not just these isolated showers that we're currently seeing that are dropping snow on the hills, but a pretty substantial and prolonged band of precipitation. And that may end up dragging colder air aloft down to the surface more effectively because it is prolonged and more intense. And so that's why I think that there could be a couple of surprises tonight in the Bay Area or the Central Valley somewhere. I don't expect it to be widespread, but there might be a few places even below 500 feet that see certainly flakes in air and maybe even a little bit of accumulation. And also, above 500 feet, especially as you get closer to 1,000 feet, which is, again, still quite low in elevation, there could be fairly substantial accumulations in some places. So, at 1,000 or 1,500 feet, there could be multi-inch accumulations and locally pretty heavy snowfall at 1,500 feet. So that's going to be pretty disruptive because those places are places that, if they see snowfall historically, usually it's a dusting. At 1,000 or 1,500 feet, to get several inches or even half a foot of snow is going to be a pretty big deal. So in places like the Santa Cruz Mountains, for example, there could well be 6 to 12 inches of snow in some places tonight. So we're talking like real heavy snowfall that's going to accumulate, especially above 1,500 or 2,000 feet. And so that does include some major roadways up there that I expect will be potentially closed, certainly plowable. Caltrans does, as I mentioned in the last one, have some plows that they have available in places like the Bay Area, but not very many. So these high elevation roads are probably going to be a mess. So keep that in mind if you go up to see the snow tomorrow. You probably won't have to go very far in most parts of Northern California. In fact, some places it's going to be right outside your door. Other places it's going to be just a few hundred feet up the hill. So it might be a good day for a short hike. All right, so that's Northern California. The peak impacts, I think, are going to be tonight with the most widespread substantial precipitation as well as the lowest snow levels. So there could be some real interesting things pop up tonight in Northern California. Then on Friday, the storm actually intensifies as it moves southward. So this will not be a particularly severe storm in Northern California, but this is going to be a notably intense storm in Southern California, so especially south and east of about Santa Barbara. This storm is going to be highly dynamic. It's going to bring heavy rain at low elevations and strong winds, along probably with some thunderstorms, so there could be some localized flood issues. But the more impressive thing is that the air mass is going to start really cold, so initially there could be snow down to about 2,000 feet in Southern California. That snow level is going to rise during the peak of the storm to about 3,000 or 3,500 feet, which is still pretty low for a storm of this magnitude. And then it's going to crash again on the back end of the storm to below 2,000 feet, maybe more like 1,500 feet once again. And there will be widespread precipitation still around in Southern California when that happens. So dusting of snowfall to low elevations has already occurred in some parts of Southern California, but don't be too surprised when that snow level starts to rise during the peak of the storm. The highest potential for widespread accumulating snow down to about 1,500 or 2,000 feet in Southern California is actually going to occur on the back end of the system. So after it has rained, it might change over to snow once again in the high deserts and even some of the lower deserts and the lower foothills as well. So there will be significant impacts at lower elevations from rain, possible thunderstorms, but then what really is kind of astonishing are the snow totals that are projected for the Southern California mountains and the southern Sierra Nevada. Snowfall in some of the Southern California mountains could exceed 3 or 4 feet, not inches, but feet, over about a 48-hour period, and could locally be as much as 6 or 7 feet on the peaks. Again, just to reiterate, we're talking about over a 2 to 3 day period, the potential for anywhere from about 3 to 7 feet of snowfall in the highest elevations of the mountains in Southern California. Of course, there's not going to be 3 to 7 feet of snow at 1,500 feet. That's absolutely not going to happen. But if we're talking about the mountains above 7,000 feet, or even 5,000 feet, I guess, in some spots for the multi-foot totals, this could be really substantial. In fact, it could be a historically significant snowfall for parts of the Southern California mountains. This maybe the largest single event snowfall in some parts of Southern California since the 1980s. So this is a big deal. Weather Service in Los Angeles has issued a blizzard warning despite the news media headlines not for the city of Los Angeles. I am astonished, but maybe I shouldn't be, about how many headlines say blizzard in LA. That is not going to happen. Nowhere close to that is going to happen in the city of LA, but there will be some low elevation snow. Low elevation meaning as low as about 1,000 to 1,500 feet locally, which of course is very low, but is definitely not downtown LA. And the blizzard warning is not in effect, of course, for the city of Los Angeles, but it's in effect for the mountains above Los Angeles. So that's still pretty remarkable as far as we can tell, and as far as the Weather Service can dredge up in its records. There hasn't been a blizzard warning issued by that office, the LA office, I believe, since the 1980s. So potentially since that big storm that this one may be comparable to. So this is going to be a really high impact storm for the mountains of Southern California. This is not a weekend you're going to be able to go up and ski. No one is going to be able to get in or out, potentially for days. And so if you live up there, be prepared for a phenomenal amount of snow. And if you don't live up there, realize that you're not going to be getting up there. And you don't want to go up now and get stuck either. Major snowfall, of course, in the Sierra Nevada as well. It's not quite as big a deal in some spots, although in the southern Sierra this will again be a big deal snowstorm, including on the eastern slopes. So the western slopes are usually the windward side that receive way more precipitation than the east slopes in winter storms. But because this low pressure system is going to head directly over Southern California, there's actually going to be east to west flow at the end of the storm with very cold air aloft over the eastern Sierra. So the eastern slopes will see an extraordinary amount of snowfall in this event. There's going to be a very high risk of avalanches in the mountains of Southern California and in the southern Sierra, which is unusual for this region. So just another hazard that we don't often talk about in this part of the world. So this is going to turn into quite the storm. In Northern California, the novelty of snow, potentially accumulating snow to very low elevations, aside from the travel disruptions associated with that, this probably won't be a hugely problematic storm up in Northern California. It's going to be more of a novelty. In Southern California, though, this is really going to cause some problems. And in some parts of the high mountains, this is going to be a historically significant snowstorm. So that's saying something in this part of the world for sure. All right, so that's probably enough with the overview for now. I think that covers most of it. There's only a few comments and questions right now, but I'm assuming those will start to flow in once you hear me asking for those questions to come in. So we'll look and see what we've got here at the moment. Some comments about hail down at 1,200 feet in Southern California. Yes, anywhere in California is likely or could plausibly see small hail, even accumulating small hail over the next couple of days. Maybe even some grapple, some rimed snowflakes making it all the way to sea level in some spots. You may even have mixed precipitation. I've seen some places where there's kind of a mix of hail and grapple. Question about Calaveras County at 700 feet. You're going to be right on the razor's edge, but keep your fingers crossed. Maybe it'll happen. I think it's less likely that it'll happen that low, but there's at least, I'd say, maybe a 30-40% chance. So it's probably more likely than not you won't get an accumulation there, but I wouldn't totally rule it out. And some flakes in air definitely possible at 700 feet in Calaveras County. Report of wet snow in downtown Ukiah. No surprises there. Ukiah might see fairly substantial snowfall tonight. We're talking there might be a period of heavy snowfall, so heavy that it actually reduces visibility as well as accumulating in the interior of Mendocino County. So Highway 101 is going to be a mess in that part of the state, as it might be all the way up to the north coast as well. Report of snow in the foothills near Cameron Park. It was odd, like hail, but not chunks of ice. It was fluffier. That may have been grapple. The best analogy is Dippin' Dots, if you've ever seen that kind of freeze-dried frozen ice cream that I think now only is relegated to vending machines at airports and sports stadiums. That's exactly the texture almost of Graupel is essentially they're snowflakes that while they're still up in the air, because the air is very cold, they get rimed by liquid water. So they're like snowflakes that form and then get a coating of ice on the outside. So they don't melt as quickly as they fall. They can actually make it all the way to sea level, even if the temperature at sea level is well above freezing, if the air aloft is cold enough. And so they're soft. So small hail, they'll make a pinging and a clicking sound as they hit hard objects. So they're hard ice. Graupel is just soft. So if it hits the ground or hits your car windshield, it's just kind of plop and melt quickly. That's sort of the difference between the soft Graupel and harder small hail. Those are the two kinds of frozen precipitation that you might see even all the way at sea level during this event if you're too low for true snowflakes. All right, let's see. Various questions about snow at the different mountain ranges in central California. Yes, the answer for all of them is likely yes at some point during this event. How much is going to depend on how high you are, but if your hills or mountains are above about 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet in elevation, if the peaks are above that, then absolutely they're going to see some accumulation during this event. Accumulating snow in the Santa Monicas, that is possible, certainly, with this event. In fact, I might even say it's plausible, maybe a 50-60% chance, so maybe even more likely than not at the highest elevations, and maybe even down to mid-slope in some spots. So that's possible, plausible even. Lots of reports of squalls with hail, not surprising. Again, you're at 450 feet, you're kind of at the razor's edge. If you keep your fingers crossed, maybe you'll get lucky. We'll see. Do you foresee snow impacting the Owens Valley heavily? I haven't taken a close look, but I would suspect yes, because of the easterly flow. So not at the beginning of the storm, but at the end of the storm, the wraparound flow, again, is going to be east to west, and that is going to favor snow on the east side of the Sierra. Probably into the Owens Valley to some extent. I don't know exactly how much. I have to take a closer look at that. Let's see here. Snow at the Hollywood sign. So I guess if it's 1,600 feet, maybe. I mean, not totally impossible. The question of whether there's like a visible accumulation is a little more equivocal, but I do think if you were standing at the Hollywood sign, you'd probably experience flakes falling from the sky at the very least. Let's see here. Measurable snow in Chico. That's tough. Chico's pretty low. Flakes in air, decent chance. Accumulating snow, I guess it's possible, maybe a 1 in 3 chance there. Especially if you're in the north or east side of town, up on the slopes. Even again, this is a case where even a few hundred extra feet of elevation is going to buy you a significant amount of increased snow potential, I think. A question about whether you can get snow, sleet, or Graupel with temperatures in the 40s with this system. The answer to at least 2 of those is yes. Sleet or Graupel, especially Graupel, and mainly small hail. A lot of folks sort of conflate sleet and hail. They are technically different things. I realize that might be a little bit pedantic, but they do form under different meteorological conditions and have a different likelihood of happening when the temperature is above freezing. But yes, the thing you generally will not get with temperature in the 40s is snow. You do need actual freezing air temperatures, or temperatures that are so close to freezing that the snow hasn't had time to melt yet by the time it makes it to the surface. And that's because the snow is made of it's fine ice crystals. Graupel and hail or sleet are hard ice pellets that, imagine, chucking an ice cube through hot air. It doesn't instantly melt. That if you tried to throw individual snowflakes through warm air, those aren't going to last very long. So that's kind of a gross analogy, I guess. What about snow amounts in Butte County at 1,400 feet? Definitely would expect some snow there, probably some accumulation. Honestly, it's hard to say. It could be anywhere from just a couple inches to as much as, there could be some places around 1,500 feet that get a foot or more of snow in parts of California. So it really is just going to depend on where the precipitation band's set up but you are going to get some snow at that elevation. I think that's pretty much a guarantee at this point. Long range outlook beyond this weekend, it looks like it's still going to be a fairly active and cold pattern, not as cold or as active as this pattern, so I don't think we're going to see snow levels as low as we're seeing right now, nor snow amounts as high, but it is going to continue to be active. We're going to continue to build snowpack, so that's pretty good news from a drought and water supply perspective. We will have to see what happens with our enormous snowpack that we're going to have now as we head into March. We're going to have to think about the potential for that to melt a little too quickly at some point this spring, or if we get a warm storm later this season. But right now, let's just enjoy the snow and deal with the impacts of that. It'll be a while before we know how that's going to evolve. The question about travel from northern to southern California, will it be easier early next week versus right now or this weekend? Yes, you can delay it to early next week. I would do that because all of the passes, every single roadway that goes above about 500 to 1,000 feet in California is likely going to have snow on it tomorrow and Saturday. So the Grapevine is well above that height. It's going to have potentially very heavy snowfall. So I would advise not trying that. Let's see here. There's some questions about the seasonal outlook and how what has evolved compares to that. I think that's a little beyond the scope of today's short conversation. We can talk about that one in a future call. Question about what the rest of winter looks like from this point. Honestly, there are increasingly few predictive things that are useful for the rest of winter at this point. Past performance really doesn't tell us anything about future returns in this context. But on the other hand, La Nina is fading finally. It is still there, but it is fading, and so at some point the influence of that on the atmosphere is going to weaken to a negligible point. Part of the problem with that is we haven't really had a very La Nina-like pattern for a lot of this winter anyway, so something else seems to have been really influential. I honestly don't know exactly what that is. There have been a number of interesting things that have happened. There's some speculation about the medium-term effects of the Hunga-Tonga volcanic eruption last year, which appears to have substantially affected the global atmosphere by injecting a ton of water vapor into the stratosphere. That's something we don't understand very well because usually volcanoes don't do that. They emit lots of other things, but they usually don't manage to get a ton of water vapor all the way up into the stratosphere. I honestly have no idea if that has played into this year's unusual weather patterns in the northern hemisphere this winter. I honestly don't know. Some folks will be studying it. There's some indication that it has a substantial, at least a measurable global effect, so we'll see. It could just be random noise. It could be something weird going on in the Pacific. At this early stage, it's a little hard to tell exactly what has gone on, but we can return to that a little bit later this season. Let's see here. So can you explain why this is happening in Southern California? Often cold storms are starved of moisture. Why is it happening this time? So this is pretty interesting. And this is often true. Well, this is generally true in the world where the coldest air masses tend to be much drier than much warmer air masses because you've heard me talk about this in a climate change context, but it also is true in a weather context. Warmer atmosphere has the potential to hold more water vapor. So it acts like a progressively larger, and exponentially, in fact, larger sponge for a linear increase in temperature. So the water vapor holding capacity of the atmosphere increases by about 7% per degree centigrade, or about 3 point something percent per degree Fahrenheit. So that's a pretty rapid rate of increase of water vapor holding potential. So as you have cold air masses, you exponentially decrease the amount of water vapor that those air masses can hold. We're kind of in the sweet spot with that right now in California, where this air mass is about as cold as you can get with one that's still moist enough to produce substantial precipitation. So we're kind of threading that needle. That is one reason why this is not one of those historic widespread sea level snow patterns where in the 1970s in the 1940s, where there was just widespread accumulating snowfall in places like Sacramento and San Francisco and even downtown Los Angeles, those air masses were even colder and actually even drier. Those were not really big precipitation making storms, but they were really cold air masses that had just enough moisture to produce accumulating snowfall all the way to sea level on the beaches. This air mass is different. This one it is very cold. It has what's known as modified Arctic air that has moved from the interior of Canada essentially and moved a little bit. It has retrograded a little bit, not a lot. It has moved a little bit east to west, really more like northeast to southwest, just off the coast, and has gained some moisture. So it has warmed a little bit in the low levels of the atmosphere, but not in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So it's known as the boundary layer, the exchange of heat and moisture between the ocean and the lowest levels of the atmosphere. That's why it's really easy to get snow as low as like 1,000 feet, which is really not that high up, but it's really hard to get it at sea level. But it also means that we can get really heavy snowfall at relatively low elevations, like 1,000 or 1,500 feet, because that warmer ocean, that relatively warmer ocean, is putting a lot of moisture into that lowest level of the atmosphere. That's making it fairly unstable. So we're getting these convective showers that are sometimes heavy. This is sort of threading the needle between one of just about as cold as you can get an air mass with having a significant amount of moisture. We could probably get a colder air mass, but it would probably have almost no moisture. And we could certainly have moisture air masses. We see those all the time, but they wouldn't be nearly as cold. So, in our warmed climate, I would argue this is probably about as cold as we can get with moisture in the air. We could potentially get a slightly colder air mass if it was drier with a more overland trajectory. But it is interesting to reflect on what would have been had this exact synoptic weather pattern happened 50, 60 years ago. We might have been talking about widespread sea level snow. If this air mass near the surface was a degree or two colder, that's all it would have taken to produce snow in downtown Sacramento and downtown San Francisco and maybe even Los Angeles. But it's not. This air mass is 2 or 3 degrees too warm for that. And that's about how much California has warmed since the last time there was widespread sea level snowfall in California. So it's interesting to reflect that perhaps it really has become just extremely difficult to see that kind of pattern relative to, it was still quite rare in the 20th century. It only happened a few times. But it does raise the question of whether it's even plausible anymore at all in some of California's major urban areas to see sea level snowfall on any widespread basis. I'll never say never, but the odds are certainly lower today than they used to be, and they were already quite low to begin with. That said, you could very well still see hail or graupel or just go a few hundred feet up in the hills and see some snow this week, so there is some hope there. Comments on thundersnow possibilities? Jim Cantori's favorite weather phenomena. Yeah, that's possible in some spots. It could happen in the Bay Area, even tonight in the hills. That's possible. Like Mendocino County, that could happen. Could happen in maybe in the high, mid-level mountains in Southern California Friday night or Saturday. Probably not close, maybe above 2,000, 2,500 feet. That's possible. So yeah, it could happen in a few places. I don't think it'll be widespread. It's kind of hard to get clouds tall enough to generate a lot of charge and lightning in an air mass this cold because they're so low topped, but there could be some isolated lightning with these for sure. And of course, when you have a thunderstorm, that convective cloudiness tends to drag the freezing level even lower. So you could locally get the freezing level almost all the way to the surface in a heavy convective downpour. So if you do get a thunderstorm, there's a chance for snow almost all the way down to sea level locally, certainly for graupel and hail down to sea level in those events. So there's that may happen on an isolated basis. Let's see. Question about whether snow accumulations in the transverse ranges will favor the north or south sides. I think probably the north sides, because the wraparound component on the backside of the storm, there you have air that won't be coming right up from the ocean, so it'll be a little bit less oceanic influence. And the air mass aloft is also going to be colder on the backside of the storm, so My guess would maybe be the north side, but there's definitely potential on south and north side. This is a pretty cold air mass. Question about, can more snow be tied to global warming? Not on average in most places, although interestingly, there is a crossover point, right? So in very cold places, yes, global warming is going to be tied with more snow because you can warm a lot in places that are very cold and still be below freezing, but then you got a lot more moisture in the atmosphere. So that might be true in the Arctic. We expect to see a lot more snow along the shores of the Arctic Ocean, which is normally a very dry place historically. But in a warming climate, we expect to see a lot more snowfall because it's just so much more moisture in the atmosphere, and it's still well below freezing, so it's going to fall as snow. The interesting question is whether that happens at very high elevations as well. And there is some indication that if we're talking like 9,000 feet in the American West, there might be a bit of a paradoxical effect where we do actually see snowpack that is higher in some years than in our peak historic years. But again, we're talking at extremely high elevations, like 10,000 feet. So there's not a lot of land above that elevation. So even as the snow on average decreases at low elevations, if it's sufficiently cold, meaning if you're sufficiently close to one of the poles or sufficiently close to the top of a very high mountain, you could actually see an increase in snowfall as the climate warms. So there hasn't been a whole lot of research on this, but that's a pretty basic thermodynamic reality, and there's some evidence that this might actually be happening in some spots. So there's this. The snow picture is complex. We're certainly going to lose snow in most places, and at lower elevations. And at lower elevations, I even mean like 5, 6, 7,000 feet in a lot of places in the world. But at 10,000 feet, could be a different story. In the Arctic and the Antarctic, it could be a different story. So if you live in Antarctica, which is really only true if you're on one of the scientific bases, or if you live in the Arctic, or if you live at 10,000 feet, you might have a very different picture than if you live almost anywhere else on Earth. Let's see here. More questions about specific locations. I'll give it another 10 minutes, so I'll sign off at 10 after. Question about Vollmer Peak above Berkeley at 1,900 feet. There's actually a pretty good shot today and tonight and into tomorrow of some accumulation at 1,900 feet, so it might not be heavy, but I would expect at least a dusting there, if not maybe a little more. Somebody's reporting light snow in Cloverdale right now. That's only a few hundred feet above sea level. So the interior valleys of the North Bay, again, locally below 500 feet. That could happen today or tonight or into tomorrow morning. So, this is one of those places where if there's going to be a surprise, or if there's going to be more than expected accumulating snow below 500 feet, the interior valleys of Sonoma and Napa counties would be high on that list of potential surprise locations, that's for sure. We'll see. I mean, at this point, we'll just have to see what happens tonight. It could get interesting. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, and a couple more questions about various places. Again, Eastern Sierra, this is going to be a big snowfall event, especially at the very end, so don't feel like you've been left out for the first 2/3 of the storm. You're going to get it the last third of the storm, and it's going to be quite a lot. Santa Monica Mountains, again, there are parts of the Santa Monica Mountains that get above 1,500 feet, and those are the parts of the mountains where it's most likely, maybe even a dusting down to 1,000 feet locally, but if you can get up to the highest parts of it, above 1,500 feet, it's definitely possible. And all right. Well, I think enjoy the snow if you can see it. A lot of folks will see snow from this event that haven't seen it in a long time. A lot of folks will be able to see snow even from sea level. In fact, I would argue that most people, if not virtually all people in California, will be able to literally see snow, at least on the nearby hills, from the right vantage point locally. So this should be quite the event. If you are in the mountains of Southern California, take this enormous upcoming snowstorm seriously. if you're thinking of skiing in the mountains of Southern California and driving up any of the mountain roadways this weekend, don't. Otherwise, stay safe out there and enjoy the low-level snowfall. It should be pretty picturesque. Again, just as an overview, in Northern California, the peak potential for very low snow will probably be tonight into tomorrow morning. And then in Southern California, the peak potential for heavy rainfall will be Friday into Saturday. And for low elevation snowfall, there'll be a double peak right now, and then again later on Saturday into maybe even Sunday morning, lingering in some places. We'll see the most potential for low elevation snow in Southern California and in the Southern Sierra and the San Joaquin Valley foothills on the very end of the storm. So talking about Saturday into Sunday. All right, well, thanks again, and talk to you next time.